everybody. Welcome. My name is Laura Slatkin, and I'm a faculty member here at Gallatin, where I teach ancient studies. And on behalf of my colleagues on Gallatin's Distinguished Faculty Lecture Series Committee, our committee chair, Nina Kachadurian, and Professor Kim Phillips-Fine, I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's talk by JoAnne Akalaitis. A quick word of background. The purpose of the Gallatin lecture series is to foster spaces of intellectual exchange with renowned scholars and practitioners. We invite speakers who embody Gallatin's commitment to interdisciplinary study and excellence in intellectual, civic, and aesthetic endeavors, and whose work or practice has made an outstanding contribution in one or more of these areas. And so JoAnne was an obvious choice for us. For her fortifying and enthusiastic support of this series, we thank Gallatin's Dean, Suzanne Wofford. And for making everything happen, we thank the goddesses in Gallatin's Office of Special Events, Rachel Plutzer and Teresa Anderson. And a special thank you to Oz Morales and Jen Burge, who are the tech wizards upstairs. Am I audible, or is there feedback? No, I'm well heard? Yeah. Wow. That's a historic event. Okay. It need not be said that JoAnne Akalaitis is a titan of world theater, of American theater, and yes, indeed, of dangerous theater, but let us say that. About JoAnne Akalaitis, one can say not only, nevertheless, she persisted, but also, and more importantly, always she invented. She imagined, and also she collaborates, and she challenges. One can only begin to summarize the range and level of her achievement, and I'll do it quickly because I know she doesn't like this part. JoAnne Akalaitis is the winner of 5 Obie Awards for direction and a co-founder of the critically acclaimed Mabou Mines in New York. In addition to the American Repertory Theater, where she directed Endgame and The Balcony, she has staged works by Euripides, Shakespeare, Strindberg, Schiller, Beckett, Genet, Williams, Philip Glass, and her own work at Lincoln Center Theater, New York City Opera, the Court Theater in Chicago, Opera Theater of St. Louis, and the Guthrie Theater. She's the former artistic director of the New York Shakespeare Festival and of the Public Theater, and was artist in residence at the Court Theater in Chicago. JoAnne Akalaitis has been the Andrew Mellon co-chair of the directing program at Juilliard, the first one, I think, right? And she was the Flint Professor Emeritus of Theater at Bard College. She's the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, of National Endowment for the Arts grants, the Edwin Booth Award, the Pew Charitable Trust's National Theater Artist Residency Program grant. And it's maybe not irrelevant to say at this moment that JoAnne Akalaitis, an NEA grantee, is a one-woman argument for the continued and strong funding of the NEA. JoAnne Akalaitis has had a long and distinguished career as a director and writer, and also as teacher. But this is perhaps not quite the point. She is much lauded, but one gets the feeling that she doesn't care that much for honors. What she cares about is theater, following the theater, as she put it. She cares about making and sponsoring theatrical experiences that, to paraphrase the great theater artist Reza Abdoh, quoted in her title this evening, refuse to allow the audience to leave the theater intact. I think it's fair to say that JoAnne Akalaitis has neither courted nor shied away from controversy. She's taken up the artist's task to make it new, as Ezra Pound enjoined. To be able to welcome JoAnne to Gallatin is to bring her and us, in some sense, full circle. It certainly completes one very local circle. Here we meet just a block away from the Public Theater, which she ran as artistic director. More broadly, JoAnne has been for decades in the vanguard of thinking hard about theater and its possible publics. Born in Chicago, she started her university studies at the University of Chicago in philosophy, pre-med and philosophy, but she just said to me she didn't continue in pre-med because she didn't want to do organic chemistry. And then she decamped for Stanford, more philosophy, and then a life as a theater artist and writer. And although I had long known of and admired her work, it was in 1997 that I first saw a production of hers, the unforgettable production of Euripides' Iphigenia cycle at the Court Theater in Chicago. Of the many productions of Euripides that I've seen, and I've seen a lot, it's JoAnne's that remains in the mind, reverberant and fully alive to the whiplashing intensities of that playwright. She gave us an Iphigenia who was ultimately and wholly persuasively committed to her father's project in a visually stunning production that vivified the self-willed, sacrificial heart of that play. JoAnne showed herself here, as elsewhere, a virtuoso in thinking about what to do with the chorus, that bane of many a modern production of Greek drama. JoAnne once remarked that she didn't consider herself an avant-garde director, but rather an old-fashioned and classical one. She's often been called a postmodernist, but perhaps she's better seen as a modernist of the perpetual now, making it new again and again. She's made audiences feel the newness and the newness of drama from antiquity to last month. Her work ranges from the staging of the Bacchae to the Talking Heads' Stop Making Sense show. She's perhaps best described as a perpetually radical contemporary, radical in the sense of oriented to roots, contemporary in the sense of oriented to the perpetual presence of and in the theater, where the only referendum on the now takes place via bodies in a shared room. JoAnne has many ongoing projects. Of particular interest to me as a classicist is her fabulous work, Bad News, I Was There, comprised of messenger speeches from plays ranging from Euripides to Racine and adaptations by distinguished translators. It's also the case that JoAnne fosters community beyond the theater, hosting for some years a famous Sunday salon of women artists and thinkers, some of whom are here with us this afternoon. A salon profiled a couple of years ago in The New Yorker. And for the past while, thanks to the great and like-minded Ellen McLaughlin, I had the benefit of attending the salon and can say with great, in a very heartfelt way, that it exemplifies, in another spirit, the collaborative commitments that JoAnne brought as a founder of Mabou Mines so many years ago. And in recent months, in response to our current dire political situation, JoAnne has been spearheading conversations and resistance readings and thinking intently about theater in and as action and reflection. So it's a special honor to welcome JoAnne then as consummate theater artist, citizen, and as friend. And it's an honor too to welcome her to Gallatin, for one way to think about her work in its fullest dimensions is theater as embodied critical interdisciplinarity. Gallatin commits itself to fostering experiment, collaboration, and exchange in an atmosphere of intellectual and artistic engagement. And there's no one I can imagine who better embodies these values than our distinguished lecturer, JoAnne Akalaitis. So please join me in welcoming our dangerously great contemporary, JoAnne Akalaitis.
Laura, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Hello, all you smart people here. Each autumn and spring, the Arts and Leisure section of the New York Times publishes a special preview of the new season. The theater section is a lavish Sunday display with a giant 2-page color ads which cost more than at least $300,000. From the last spring's preview, quote, "It can be dark, crowded, dark. You may not know anyone, but there's nothing like a live performance to bring strangers together, sharing laughter, tears, romance, suspense, or the sheer thrill of the unexpected." I think that's a good description, actually. The house lights go down, the stage lights come up, the play begins, and a breathtaking moment of pure potential. And once again, the possibility of piercing our intellectual and emotional safety net, as the New York Times says, the sheer thrill of the unexpected. My first sheer thrill of the unexpected happened when I was 14 years old, and my mother took me to the Chicago Theater downtown to see South Pacific. I saw an actress, Mary Martin, wash her hair and sing a song about getting a man out of her life. It was the seed of my fundamental belief that anything can happen, any story can be told on the stage. For example, Atreus in Seneca's play, Thyestes, murders his brother's sons, he butchers them, he cooks them up, and he serves them to his brother for dinner. Or Medea actually killing her own children to get even with Jason. What I was dimly glimpsing was that there lies an unconscious, illogical, unknown, and chaotic landscape, a deeper language, a fabric of signs residing in the collective unconscious, intuitively internalized by its participants, both performers and audience. Afra Bain, the female Restoration playwright and the first professional writer in English, said, "The theater is a place where secret signs are sent to the audience." And I believe that. I believe that the intimate humanness of the theater is a fertile arena for danger. We're imprisoned in a room, not unlike the ones in Pinter plays, where intimacy may not necessarily be reassuring, but intimidating, where once the performance begins, both actor and audience engage in an unspoken, I would say kind of holy contract to enter an unknown, possibly threatening terrain. But is there a difference between frightening, shocking, disturbing, and violent in performance and what is dangerous, whatever that means? Something perhaps like what Roland Barthes called panic situations, without remainder, without return. I actually don't know, and the best I can do this evening is talk about some theater artists and projects which may touch on these panic situations. The dictionary definition of danger is hazardous, risky, able to inflict injury. Well, like many of us, I've spent a lot of time in rehearsal rooms in states of nervous uncertainty, sometimes even with physical symptoms. I developed a terrible tic in my right eye rehearsing the Iphigenia project. Sarah Benson, the director of Sarah Kane's brutal play Blasted, admitted that, quote, "it messed with my head." And someone once said in a tech rehearsal of some Greek play that this is like getting a divorce every day. So does any of what we theater practitioners experience working on this really tough material, like the Greeks, Seneca, the Jacobeans, Jean Genet, shake down to the audience? Can there be a psychological mechanism to internalize and negotiate the events in pieces such as Euripides, the Bacchae, and Seneca's Thyestes? And how do we decipher the less overtly violent and insidiously menacing work of writers like Harold Churchill, Harold Pinter, and Samuel Beckett? Kafka said, "What we need are books that hit us like a most painful misfortune, like the death of someone we loved more than we love ourselves, that makes us feel as though we have been banished to the woods, far from any human presence, like suicide." That is what I believe, and that is what I believe about theater. I don't know if these panic situations and painful misfortunes, where our moral and spiritual ground is shaken, can actually serve as tools for trying to build ethical and compassionate lives and collaborating on creating harmonious families and societies. But I do know that we try like hell to use them that way, especially with the Greeks. Here's an example. I directed Euripides, the Trojan Women, probably the greatest anti-war play ever written, at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C., in a new translation by Nicholas Ruddle, with designers Paul Steinberg, Jennifer Titman, and Doe Luti. We made obvious choices that referenced war images, and it happened that the show was during the Bosnian War. The critic in the Washington Post wrote rather hyperbolically that Paul Steinberg's set design seemed taken straight out of Picasso's, quote, Picasso's anti-war painting Guernica, which we never looked at or even discussed. And that, quote, every war of this century, and by implication all wars, is condemned by this production. It was almost as if the Bosnian War was good publicity for the show. In the rehearsal room, we were very busy with some of the usual, maybe disturbing problems of rehearsing a play like this, like how to get the mother of the little boy playing Astyanax out of the room when we rehearsed the scene of Hecuba mourning her little grandson lying dead on his grandfather Hector's shield. Okay, here comes my big test. Click. There it is. So here's the Greek guys trying to take the boy away. Here's his mother, Andromache, played by Socorro Santiago. And here's the child, dead. And Hecuba, played by Petronio Paley, with the boy. And here she is, mourning him. And she says these terrible words. "O child, the walls that were yours have battered your skull. My heart breaks when I see death grinning in your broken mouth. I touch your hand, limp and cold, and I remember your father. I touch your lips and remember the child voice that sang in my heart, silent now." That was tough. That was hard. It's hard to rehearse. It takes a toll. Harold Pinter. We did The Birthday Party at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge with Paul and Jennifer, and Gabriel Barry did the costumes. It's called A Comedy of Menace. The play centers on Stanley, a failed piano player who lives in a rundown boarding house in an English seaside town. Two sinister strangers, Goldberg and McCann, grotesque caricatures of the quintessential British outsiders, Jews and Irishmen, arrive at what may not be Stanley's birthday party, looking for him. They speak about the organization, and Stanley's wild birthday party turns into a nightmare. The play ends with Goldberg and McCann taking the mute Stanley, dressed in a suit, to the anonymous Monty. So there is McCann, there's Goldberg, and here's Stanley coming down the stairs, and here they are interrogating him. Here's some dialogue. Goldberg: "Where is this lechery leading you?" McCann: "You'll pay for this." Goldberg: "You stuff yourself with dry toast." McCann: "You contaminate womankind." Goldberg: "Why don't you pay the rent?" McCann: "Mother defiler." Goldberg: "Why do you pick your nose?" McCann: "I demand justice." Goldberg: "What's your trade?" McCann: "What about Ireland?" Goldberg: "What's your trade?" Stanley: "I play the piano." Goldberg: "How many fingers do you use?" Stanley: "No hands." Goldberg: "No society would touch you, not even a building society." McCann: "You're a traitor to the cloth." Goldberg: "What do you use for pajamas?" Stanley: "Nothing." Goldberg: "You verminate the sheet of your birth." McCann: "What about the Albigensianist heresy?" Goldberg: "Who watered the wicket in Melbourne?" McCann: "What about the blessed Oliver Plunkett?" Goldberg: "Speak up, Weber. Why did the chicken cross the road?" Stanley: He wanted to, he wanted to, he wanted to. McCann, he doesn't know. Goldberg, why did the chicken cross the road? Stanley, he wanted to, he wanted to. Goldberg, why did the chicken cross the road? Stanley, he wanted. McCann, he doesn't know. He doesn't know which came first. Which came first? Goldberg, which came first? Chicken, McCann. Chicken, egg, which came first? Goldberg and McCann, which came first? Which came first? Which came first? Stanley screams. And we also, Paul came up with the device of the walls moving in and gradually through the play, knocking down, crushing all the tchotchkes and stupid furniture. Now, this was a very obvious choice, but it was really a good choice. Pinter said in 2009, it's possible to say that two people knocking at the door of someone's residence and terrorizing them and taking them away has become more and more actual in our lives. It happens all the time. It just becomes more and more real. Now, Goldberg and McCann's treatment of Stanley does resemble enhanced interrogation techniques that we know all about it. We know all about these. But to say that the birthday party is solely and primarily a political play may be reductive. With its highly complex, brilliant dramatic form, anonymous pauses, evasive dialogue that manipulates everyday British talk, and its elliptical story, Pinter manages to both contain and resist simple political analogy, as in the work of Sarah Kane. Sarah Kane was a brilliant young English playwright from what has been coined the in-your, Y-E-R-face, School of British Playwriting. She committed suicide at the age of 28 in 1999. Her play Blasted takes place in what she describes as a very expensive hotel room in Leeds, somewhere, unquote, somewhere during some unnamed war. It includes rape, oral sex, during which the young man bites the penis of her middle-aged, foul-mouthed, racist journalist boyfriend, the room shattered by a bomb blast, a soldier raping the man, sucking out his eyeballs, eating them, then shooting himself, and a dead baby being eaten. Here's some slides from the production. These were taken by Christopher Kane, Sarah Kane's brother. Here's some dialogue from it. The telephone rings loudly. Ian starts, then answers it. Ian, hello. Kate, who is it? Ian, shh. Into the mouthpiece, got it here. He takes a notebook from a pile of newspapers and reads down the phone. A serial killer slaughtered British tourist Samantha Grace in a sick murder ritual, comma. Police revealed yesterday Point New Par. The bubbly 19-year-old from Leeds was among 7 victims found buried in identical triangular tombs in an isolated New Zealand forest, Point New Par. Each had been stabbed more than 20 times and placed face down, comma. Hands bound behind their backs, Point New Par. Caps up, ashes at the site show the maniac had stayed to cook a meal. Caps down, Point New Par. Samantha, comma, a beautiful redhead with dreams of becoming a model, comma, was on the trip of a lifetime after finishing her A-levels last year. Point. Samantha's heartbroken mum said yesterday, quoting, we pray the police will come up with something, anything, comma, soon. Point still quoting. The sooner this lunatic is brought to justice, the better, Point New Par. The Foreign Office warned tourists down under to take care, Point. A spokesman said, quoting, common sense is the best rule, end quote, copy ends. He listens, then he laughs. Exactly. He listens. That one again. I went to see her. Sgrouse tart. Spread her legs. No. Forget it. Tears and lies. North worth the space. No. Tosser. Sarah Kane said she wrote the play in response to the Bosnian War. And Sarah Benson, the director of the New York production, told me that for her it is about, here, let me turn this off. Okay. Northern Ireland and all civil wars. I should also mention Carol Churchill's Far Away, with its spectacular hat parade in the middle of the play, where ragged, beaten, chained prisoners on their way to execution parade in extravagant, enormous hats, which is not, the audience is not prepared for it. It's only briefly explained after the event. Pinter said there's a common ground, but it's more like quicksand. He also said communication is too alarming. It can be a struggle to find redemptive value in works where the playwrights clothe horrifying events which we want to be intellectually manageable in very uncomfortable garments, which I think Sarah Kane and Pinter do. One of my favorite heroes, Charles Darwin, expresses what I'm circling around here. He wrote about an 1836 earthquake in The Voyage of the Beagle in Chile. Quote, "A bad earthquake at once destroys our oldest associations. The earth, the very emblem of solidity, has moved beneath our feet like a thin crust over a fluid. 1 second of time has created in the mind a strange idea of insecurity, which hours of reflection would not have produced." And of course, we all think of the terrible suffering of those in Mexico now. And Samuel Beckett said in The Unnameable, "I shall have to speak of things of which I cannot speak." And yet, the great dramatist can't stop speaking about them, beginning with the giant Greeks. Nor can we stop talking about them, including me, right at this moment. The Greeks. The columnists, and I'm not a classicist, I'm not an expert on Greek drama, so I don't have any big insight here. The columnist Jimmy Breslin often told the story about a guy who sold Chinese language newspapers in bars and restaurants. Between drinks, he would shout out the headlines that sold the most papers. One was war, and the other, big guy dies. Ezra Pound said, "Literature is literature that stays news." The Greeks seem to take care of a lot of this. Besides war and the big guys, what it means to choose between personal integrity and life itself, the mercurial gods, the consequences of hubris, vengeance, forbidden love, family betrayal, virgin sacrifice, matricide, infanticide, incest, revenge. The awful details of these stories are usually told to us by my favorite character in classical drama, an overburdened messenger whose heartbreaking mantra, "I was there and I will tell you everything," is the prelude to awfully bad news. A mother's hallucinogenic, brutal dismemberment of her son, a resistant girl hanging in a cave, and brothers battling each other to the death in the line which always breaks my heart, biting the earth with their teeth. And then there are those characters for whom, in spite of common sense, we develop such affection, like the crazed Ajax and reckless Orestes, the greatest female characters in drama, Medea, Hecuba, Cassandra, Alcestis, Antigone. But then comes the end, when hoping for some resolution, solace, and redemption, we're left hanging at the end of the show, when after all these horrific events have happened, in an efficient 90 minutes, there's a brutally business-like wrap-up, sometimes with a convenient deus ex machina or a nifty platitude often from the chorus. For example, from Nick Ruddle's translation of the Bacchae, "Many are the ways of the gods, many are the deeds of the gods." or the end of David Green's Hippolytus. The lamentable stories of great men prevail more than of humble folk. And one of my favorites, the chorus in Anne Carson's Antigonics, last word wisdom, better get some even too late. The major characters can be breathlessly brief. In the Trojan Women, Hecuba's last words, the Greek fleet waits. And in Ellen McLaughlin's translation of the Persian, Xerxes says, take my hand and lead me home. Shelley's famous "We are all Greeks" seems to assure us that their timelessness or and universality seems to assure us that there's a common mythology which we can reference. However, I have to admit that when I read the news about ethnic cleansing in Burma, and the headlines from yesterday's Times, protesters refuse to stand on the sideline, and Trump imposes new travel ban on 7 countries, it's pretty difficult for me to find a resonant niche in this classical cosmology. For me, the great myths of tragedy are more like that one paragraph Borges story, Exactitude in Science, in which a map of the empire is as big as the empire itself, or like a journey through the labyrinthine Bardo geography in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. In other words, I'm not sure how to use this literature. But, however, in spite of, anyway, I want to sign up. I continue to dig in and get lost in this enormous cartology. The Greeks gave us a remarkably simple form, a miraculous template that invites our unapologetic creative response and invention. It's for all of us, from classicists to Pina Bausch. So I'm going to just throw up some pictures here of stuff that I participated in. I did, Laura talked about the Iphigenia project in Chicago, and I love directing these plays, but I was especially interested in Iphigenia and Taurus. This is a photo from it. It's a community of kind of butchy women living exiled to this island, murdering Greek soldiers. It brought to me something terrible, which is the meticulous record of a genocidal regimes like Hitler and the Khmer Rouge, especially the Khmer Rouge photographs of taking those minutes before their death, in the awful proximity and meticulousness of evil, the counting of it. And I saw a picture of an Iranian graveyard where there were pictures of the dead on poles, and I thought, oh, this is a good idea. And so we went around the University of Chicago campus to take pictures of students, asking them to visualize the moment before their death, more or less successful. So here's this kind of butchy girls, vengeful, and they're, Doey Ludi's great idea about their bathing suits. And this is Iphigenia's reunion with Orestes. And the end, which is very unsatisfying, when Athena comes out as a kind of Aretha Franklin character and wraps up with a rousing gospel tune. More from the Trojan Women. The Trojan Women was really, like, literally a dangerous show. I mean, Paul Steinberg's set was on a rake stage with a very athletic chorus who were asked to jump around, and if the brakes on these industrial strength office desks were enormously heavy, and it broke, it would slide down into the audience and maybe kill some of them, or at least injure them. And there was fire and metal gates slamming and noise and horrible helicopters and rapes and toilets and women asking, the chorus were asked to shave their heads. That's hard. That's hard if you're an actor with a gorgeous head of beautiful hair. So, Jennifer's harsh lighting. This is Cassandra, Hecuba and Cassandra, and this is the end of the play. In the last line, Hecuba says, "The Greek fleet waits." These are some photos from Thyestes, which I did with Kay Boyce, who did the sets and costumes, and Jennifer did the lighting. This is Carol Churchill's unbelievable translation of Seneca's lurid, thoroughly Roman drama. You know, Seneca wrote of this chaotic sinkhole that was Nero's Rome with its terrible excesses and cruelty. And he was his tutor. Now, one idea about the play, which is, I think some scholars discredit, but I like, is that he couldn't criticize his boss directly. So we chose out to play out his grotesque loudness in bad suits. Oh, that's the Fury, where we used an homage to a Roman mass. So there he is with the chorus, who was a little boy before his voice changed. And it's sort of, because we wanted to be Italian, a kind of Anna Magnani type. So we have this loud who kept tripping over things and slamming doors and bumping into stuff. And there's Thyestes with his son. And the chorus, the great chorus, played by Wilson Kane III. Okay, so he cooks up the food. And what we did is we had a competition, a stew competition for the best stew. So we cooked up various stews and we judged them, and we piped them through the ventilation system of the theater, which appeared on cue or not. And here he is in his rented gladiator outfit from some outfit in Chicago, some gladiator place in Chicago, with his cooler box. And these, you can't see them very well, but the well-rehearsed and labored latex heads of the little boys, his little sons. And as often happens with these prop situations, in these plays that get to you when you work on them, with all the kind of sordid humor about body packs, and like the head of Pentheus in the Bacchae, it can be a howler, or the heart on the dagger in the Jacobean play, Just Pity She's a Whore. I remember at the public we used a sheep's heart, which rolled off the dagger and rolled into the audience one night. Now, you know, all of this is kind of funny, but it really isn't when you work on it after a while. Jean Genet. In college, I saw Cocteau's Blood of the Poet. I was exhilarated by the image of the moving mouth on the hand of the artist. It brought back psychosexual images of my Catholic girlhood. Saint Teresa, the little flower who legend has it washed the floor with her saliva, and my teenage fascination with the then famous priest, Padre Pio, canonized in 2002, who suffered Christ's stigmata, which witnesses say smelled like roses. And believe it or not, I read in the New York Times last week that his famous fingerless blood-stained gloves are now in display along with his cloak at St. Patrick's Cathedral right now. I'm convinced that all this stuff presaged my fascination with the work of Jean Genet and his bold beatifications of bodily fluids. Ah, those knockout fluids, blood, sperm, and tears from his novel Querelle, which Fassbinder made into a beautiful lyric film, his last, before he died of a drug overdose. Genet says, quote, "We can only dream of an art which would be a deep blend of active symbols, able to offer an audience a language in which nothing can be said but everything felt. And when the public leaves the theater, I wanted to carry the well-known taste of ashes and the odor of decay in its mouth." I love Genet. His luscious decadence, heightened language, perverse delinquency, undomesticated criminality. Patti Smith calls him a superior bum of art. And Simone de Beauvoir, a thug of genius, dangerous, gorgeous. Genet constantly expressed his distaste for conventions of theater. At the same time, he wrote beautifully difficult plays and really invaluable insights into the craft of acting and directing in his famous letters to Roger Blanc about the premiere of the screens, which continues to be an invaluable handbook for all theater practitioners. I saw the original production of Les Paravents, the screens, in 1966 at the Odeon Theater, directed by the legendary Roger Blanc, who was a colleague and friend of Artaud's, and also the director of the premieres of all of Beckett and Genet's first masterpieces. The production at the Odeon featured, among an enormous cast playing 100 characters, the greatest classical actors of the time: Maria Caceres, Madeleine Renaud, and Jean-Louis Barrault. I was in standing room. It was 5 hours long, and I barely understood Genet's Baroque French, with its combination of, really high style and low, slangy argot. But I knew I was present at a great moment in modern theater history. Briefly, it's not done. It's not ever done. So I'll tell you what it's about. It's a vast serpentine epic set during the Algerian Revolution in both the land of the living and the land, primarily an Arab village, and the land of the dead. The central visual scenic elements are movable screens on which the actors draw the settings and the action. Originally, Genet wanted madmen in a mental hospital to do them. It's so like Genet. Throughout the play, both French and Arabs burst through the screens after they die, which is a very beautiful image of the thin membrane between life and death. They enter the land of the dead, which Genet insisted does not represent any place of reconciliation. He constantly warned against any ideological reading of his work. And at the same time, in his usual contradictory style, he had many Arab lovers, and he formed alliances with the Black Panthers and the Palestinians. The screens premiered right after the shameful Algerian, that's a pen, conflict. Public response to the original production was often explosive. French paratroopers actually stormed the stage, mostly in objections to scenes which they felt were sacrilegious and unpatriotic. A group of French soldiers, in one scene is a group of French soldiers honor their fallen really hunky homoerotic lieutenant with a quote, un petit air de la France, by farting on the dead body. In another scene, the hunky lieutenant is shot while stooped over defecating. André Malraux, the Minister of Culture at that time, defended the screens in the Chambre des Députés, which is the equivalent of Congress, citing Goya, Baudelaire, and Rimbaud. Referring to the danger of Genet's work, one representative in the Chambre used the expression metaphysical anguish, an expression I can't imagine any American politician using. Although Trump has used the big word as existential. He used it a couple times. I directed the screens in 1990 at the Guthrie Theater with Paul Schmidt's new translation in a wonderful collaboration with designers George Sippen, Jennifer Tipton, Eiko Ishioka, and a score by Fude Musosuso and Philip Glass. It was a genius of Genet's concept of the screens as a central visual element that I found revolutionary. It graphically dramatizes places and events at the same time that they're happening, created in the moment by actors whose acting informs physical objects with emotional content. They were drawing where they were, what they were doing, and often the violent emotions behind the screen, the images. The revolution occurs at the climax, or the first half of the first part of the play, which in Minneapolis, it was around 5 hours long with an hour dinner break. Again, we had a food competition for the best North African dinner. Igniting the Arabs to violence and vengeance, frantically sketched on the screen. Khadija, the Passia Nara of the revolution, incites them. Quote, "Show me the fire, the ashes, the flames, the smoke. Make me hear the crackling flames. Don't be ashamed, my sons. If you can't find more crimes, steal some from heaven. Heaven is full of criminals. Unleash the crimes of the gods, their murders, their rapes, their arsons, their incest, their lies, their killings. Women give birth to monsters." Well, in Minneapolis, no one stormed, the paratroopers didn't storm the stage, but the majestic windows of the historical Guthrie Theater, we got permission to graffiti them with images of, from the play, of graphic, violent drawings, sketches by the actors. And it was regarded by some as a defacement of a civic and cultural monument. But the end, what really shakes down for me, and continues to, is that what I find really threatening and truly dangerous in Genet's work is not what we might call his hyperbolic perversity and violence, but his persistent and thorough nihilism and embrace of the betrayal. The main character of the screens is Saeed, a low-life Arab outsider, thief, and wife-beater who betrays his fellow Arabs to the French. There's nothing attractive or charismatic about him or anything to learn, yet Genet shoves him in our faces. Genet sanctifies and eroticizes betrayal. Anyone who hasn't experienced the ecstasy of betrayal knows nothing about ecstasy at all, he says. And Edward Said, who wrote so beautiful about Genet with affection, depth, and insight in his essay on Genet's late works, he writes about Genet's identification with betrayal is both, quote, an assertion of a society that has found him a guilty criminal, but also his power to elude any attempts to rehabilitate or reclaim him, which I don't want to go into now, but I connect to some things that are happening now in our world. Genet is avoiding identity as the crook who can be punished and then forgiven. His insistent, this is from me, separation from humanity remains the most difficult and dangerous aspect of Genet's art, and at the same time, I think it does not lessen his greatness. He remains, quote from Edward, a titanic artist and personality. So here's some slides. So here's the entire company. And this was a prelude. It was called France and Algeria, 1960. So it's everybody. It's the Algerians, it's the revolutionaries, it's the French, it's the colonialists, it's everybody in a very long, slow motion movement toward the audience, which becomes progressively more aggressive. This is the main character of the mother, played by Ruth Malachek. Jesse Borrego, the character of Saeed. Jesse, who is Saeed, whose fiancée is Layla, the ugliest woman in the world, who cannot be seen, and at some point in the play dies by merely sinking into her garment. This is seen with some drawings on the screens of the villagers and various people. Oh, here's Varda, the prostitute, which was played in France by Madeline Bonneau, played by Lola Pashulinsky, who emerges from a trap with an enormous gown that expands. From under that trap crawls an Arab, played by the young Joe Hodge, the current first Palestinian-American artistic director of a theater in New York, happens to be the same Guthrie Theater. Malika, a prostitute. Oh, here's the hunky lieutenant. And also, Genet likes to go back into 18th century colonial presence in North Africa. Here's the Arab shaking, pretending to shake in front of the Europeans. Oh, this is one of my favorite scenes. It's the orchard scene. There are pictures drawn on the screens of orchards. And then what the Arabs do behind the colonial's back is set the orchard on fire by drawing flames on it. And here are the two colonialists. And you can see that they're wearing cothurnite, which are Genet used also in the balcony, used in classical drama by characters to, make them bigger than us ordinary people. And it was dangerous too. That was dangerous because that actor, he broke his ankle and had to do the whole thing in a cast in rehearsal on the cothurnite. Here's the mother strangling a French soldier with the straps of his own backpack. This is dangerous. See, and here's the women of the village. Khadija, the great, played by Isabel Monk, the female voice of the revolution. Saeed being arrested. And here's the Land of the Dead. So the Land of the Dead was a cargo net that stretched over the playing area and over the audience, through which these dead people crawled through the entire show. Here is a dead person. Saeed being, there's Saeed at the end of the show with the Land of the Dead, with the screens, the shattered screens, and the village. I'm going to talk about Reza Abdoh. Any discussion of dangerous theater must include Reza Abdoh, who died of AIDS in 1995 at the age of 32. It was in LA. He was born in Tehran, and he came to America. It was in LA that he began exploring classics such as Lear, Oedipus, and Medea. Reza's work quickly developed into a unique theater a vision of a universe on fire. He created a body of work in an abandoned LA motel, the meat packing district of New York, the decrepit Diplomat Hotel in Times Square, and regular theaters all over the world, with his furiously dedicated company called Dar Aluz, whose stamina, physical and vocal pyrotechnics, and emotional commitment evoked Artaud's famous call for performance, like victims burnt at the stake, signaling through the flames. Only in this case, it was thermonuclear. One finds not only Artaud and Genet, but also the Marquis de Sade, Pasolini, Fassbinder, Foucault, in Reza's great juicy world. The inspiration and subjects for his theater pieces include Dostoevsky, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the story of the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer as filmed by Andy Warhol's Factory, Hitchcock films, African and Asian dance traditions, folk dance, and hip-hop. The composition and design of Reza's epic pieces was minutely detailed and choreographed. It was constantly changing, hurling forward. It was like a metaphor for his own impending death. He was a master of shock density. Every image and every move on the stage was intricately arranged, choreographed, composed. And as far as I know, these pieces have not been recreated. They're represented by scripts, photos, films. They're shadows and ghosts of their charged originals. Reza's work, like I believe most performance, only in his case more so, stands for itself, resisting and denying any reproduction or canonization. Reza was diagnosed with HIV when he was 23. His work may have been so fierce, extreme, and dangerous because he was close to death. Again, from Genet, if we maintain that life and the stage are opposite, it is because we strongly suspect that the stage is a site closely akin to death, a place where all liberties are possible. I believe that Reza was in some way practicing death in his work, in which I personally find a connection to the writing not only of Jean Genet, but also Seneca and some Buddhist teaching. I have here a clip from one of Reza's pieces, Tight White Right, which I saw, among other pieces, about race, which he describes, quote, as a minstrel show with Borscht Belt nightclub. The main characters who carry the nearly impossible to follow story forward, and much of the dialogue is shouted from a really awful 1970s film, Mandingo. The two main characters, a grotesquely exaggerated Jewish caricature in a fat suit with a fake nose named Moishe Pibik, and an equally caricatured black junkie named Blaster. I'm not going to go here into the question of what the critic Michael Feingold posed. Does the work succeed in shaking our souls to the core? And if so, is that itself a good thing to do? Or a discussion of the value of Reza's shock tactics. Reza himself always spoke of the moral responsibility of theater, about it being, quote, a reaction to systematic repression and erosion of freedoms. I'm going to show you some clips of Tight White Right, and I'm warning you that these images are hard to take, especially after Charlottesville. I think maybe Reza was prescient. The last project I'm going to talk about is Cut Piece for Pantsuit. Cut Piece for Pantsuit came up in the casual women's theater salon that Laura mentioned to you in the introduction, which takes place at my home, where we gather once a month. We've gathered for 3 years. Once a month, theater artists and academics and visual artists to discuss everything from Joan Rivers to Antigone. After the election, we were a wreck. We read aloud from 19th century feminist manifestos like Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Some of us, we were weeping. Yoko Ono's iconic cut piece from 1964 was discussed as a possible performance that we might do. A cut piece is remarkably simple. Here's the score. Quote, performer sits on stage with a pair of scissors. It is announced that members of the audience may come on stage one at a time to cut a small piece of the performer's clothing to take with them. Performer remains motionless throughout the piece. Piece ends at the performer's option. Yoko Ono performed the piece in 1965 at Carnegie Hall. She sat on the stage wearing a simple black dress, holding a pair of scissors. In the Maisel brothers film, one sees at the beginning, people are tentative, kind of hesitant to cut the garment. But as the performance progresses, the audience becomes more emboldened, especially men. Near the end of her performance, the participants cut more and more fabric off her dress until it's basically in shreds. One of the final male participants cuts her bra straps. Throughout most of the performance, Yoko remains still and passive, but near the end, she is clearly uncomfortable, holding her bra up after the straps were cut, trying to shield her breasts. After decades, it's still very hard to view this film. Cut piece became an early icon of a very powerful feminist performance body art movement. Yoko said herself that the impulse came from the desire to create art free from ego, that the mentality of saying, here you are, take anything you want, any part you want, rather than pushing something on someone else. She also made analogies to the Buddha being eaten by a tiger, and then later when she did it when she was 70, to ageism and sexism. But I think what really counts in this piece is that it presents a situation in which the viewer is implicated in the potentially aggressive act of unveiling the female body, and that the performer herself invites this violation. Cut piece for Pantsuit was much discussed that evening in my living room, and afterwards in a lot of emails. There were serious reservations, not only about danger, but also about what it means, what its message is. Here's a note from a well-known playwright actress. Quote, when I think about this idea as a performer, it instinctively feels wrong. It seems to me that this would be a matter of staging a ritualistic humiliation of the female. I can't understand how, holy crap. Oh, I lost the page. Well, anyway, she says how it, I can sort of paraphrase it, how it doesn't matter who does the cutting, a man or a woman, that it is simply the idea of having one's clothing cut from your body that she finds a violation. She found a violation to women and to and to her own body. In other words, an insult. So here we are, missing page 23. Anyway, I can reconstruct it. We decided to do the piece anyway in Madison Square Park in the middle of New York, which is a very busy place. And the whole issue of safety was a major concern, with a lot of back and forth. Let's have plants do it. Let's use round tip scissors. Let's do it at MoMA. Let's do it in the subway. Let's do it, and we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it seemed essential that we just bite the bullet and do it. And there were a lot of discussions about, our friends as bodyguards and whatever. And we went ahead with it. And someone wrote that what was essentially at risk in cut suit for pantsuit was that women stood unprotected in a busy public place with no way of knowing or controlling who might come by and decide to cut more clothing than clothing with those scissors. And it's hard. It's actually not hard to remember when you think about it how we felt after the election, especially women, how defeated, how vulnerable, how threatened, how shaky, how scared. And that played into all the discussions. And we can never forget that. We can't forget it. The major threat that morning of December 19th turned out to be the cold, where the high was 29 degrees. And it really was cold. And the talk shifted from fear of surprise violence to thermo underwear and body warmers. Cut piece for pantsuit I thought was beautiful. The composition of 10 composed, silent women in pantsuits offering scissors in the park, against surrounding buildings, the hush in the midst of the busy street noise, and the careful, one might say even compassionate action of those cutting their clothing, an event elevated, I thought, to a kind of solemn ritual. And I must mention, besides the brave performers, the co-director Ashley Tata, who had the original idea, and the costume designer Alana Brightman. Here's a short piece that someone put together about it. Okay, I'm going to end with a quote from Artaud. "We are not free, and the sky can fall on our head, and the theater has been created to teach us that first of all." So thank you. We have questions. There's a time for questions.
A question or two?
You said that you used the scent of stew in one of your productions. Do you think, I don't know, I guess an old directing teacher of mine had said that to use the sense of smell was sort of cheating to force the audience to have that experience. What are your thoughts of this smell sense and the cooking thing that you did?
Well, I liked it. I thought it was a really good idea. I mean, I don't usually, when someone comes on stage with a rose, I don't pipe rose smells through the audience. But I don't know. It made this seemed obvious because it was palpable, and the father is sitting there and he's eating his kids who happen to smell like beef bourguignon, the way that Atreus cooked them up, or the prop mistress cooked them up.
Guess we're going to dinner after. Other thoughts? Other questions? Everybody's just digesting this. Let's thank JoAnne again. Oh yeah, here's it.
I have a quick question. Some critics often identify age as a major turning point. Oh, thank you. Some critics, I'm thinking of Hal Foster, who's an art critic, often identify the onset of AIDS as a major turning point in what we often think of as the avant-garde. Some people, remark about 9/11 and how that changed certain art practices. Are there events that have happened in your lifetime working as an artist and as an activist that you feel like have really, you felt a major shift after those moments?
Well, there's one happening right now. The women's movement, the anti-nuclear movement, civil rights, Vietnam. I'm especially thinking about about women now. You know, after the big march in Washington, somehow, where are we? Where are we? And I wonder how many people know that in this audience that on November 6th, it's the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote in New York. Daniel, yeah, because I told, yeah. Yeah, see, I mean, that kind of depresses me. But we are going to do something on November 6th at the Tribeca Performing Arts. So come to that, or look it up or something like that. I mean, nothing can be forgotten. No, I mean, there's a Reza thing here where Reza says, as long as there's comfort, there's less reason to get off your butt and raise your own voice. Take up arms and hit the street. Fulfill your desire to be counted and take destiny into your own hands. And I think the key word here is as long as there's comfort.
So do you consider then that the theater is not in every form, but in these massively powerful ones you've been talking about, designed to take away all comfort, both in the sense of intellectually and powerfully, but also for the audience as a visceral, having the floor pulled out from under you kind of experience?
I think we need more of that. Yes.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against Hello Dolly at all.
Or South Pacific.
I want to see it, actually.
I was just wondering if there's ever been a time, thanks, if there's ever been a time where you felt you pushed a boundary too far and regretted something you did in your work?
Yeah, there were consequences that made me think, but no, I can't think of any. I think you can't. I don't know what. There are things I can't do. For example, I could not have directed Blasted because of the eating the baby, and that's because I'm a mother. But someone else, she did it, and I'm thankful that she did it. So no, I don't think I've gone through too far, and I don't think Sarah Benson went too far.
So further for question, I'm curious how you can suggest that young artists can go farther in this current climate that we live in, with the impressive trajectory of your career and how it seems to be almost interdisciplinary to some extent. I'm interested on your thoughts on what you would say to young artists in all disciplines for resisting and doing it creatively.
Well, I just read the New York Times and turn on CNN and then get together with your buddies and make a piece about it. I mean, the material there's so much material. There's so much material. I have a front page of the New York Times. The expulsion of Muslims in Burma and the betrayal, her betrayal of a massive population, it's right there. There's so much material, and it's radical material. So I can't tell anyone how to push boundaries. That's your job. You can do it.